Hi, welcome back to the shop. So, I'm going to be working on a finish to get this. So, this is a job I've been doing for a client for a kitchen. Half of the kitchen is done in this finish, which is a white oak with a kind of a gray-black stain on it. But I'm going to be using production wiping stains. So, I can order these from industrial suppliers. This is not the stuff that you can get at the Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those places. But it's a fast wipe stain and it's meant for production use. And I'm not really a production shop, but I have access to production equipment and materials like this. But it makes my life so much easier and I can get a really high quality product by using these things. So this is not something common that you'll get to see just because it's more for an industrial setting. So basically it's a wipe-on stain, but I spray it on, and a shader that I can tone out any of the colors that may be just a little bit light, and I can make everything kind of nicely blend together. And then I top coat with polyurethane, so it gets a sealer and 2 top coats on the face. On the back it gets a sealer and 1 top coat. And every top coat is done, and I always do basically a double top coat, meaning it goes in one direction with the grain and then against the grain to get a full wet coat on each one. So I'm going to show you the process of how I do this, and you might find it interesting. Good morning. So in the finishing booth here, so I've got to start staining up this job here. Here are some of the parts. These are lower base, they're cover bases that are going over top of the panels for around the island, and end panels around gables and so on like that in the kitchen. So I've got to put stain on. Now what I'm using is a fast wipe sprayable stain. So basically it's a spray on and then a wipe off process. But this is part of the job. Again, it's a thankless part of the job, just like sanding is. Finishing is exactly the same way. If you don't do your sanding properly, your finishing doesn't look proper, and everything looks terrible from there. So this is the last check before anything is done. So I make sure that as I'm staining, I can make small adjustments to it. But at the end of the day, it has to be perfect. Anyways, I'll show you what I'm doing here. I'm not going to put the fan on for this, but it's only a couple of pieces. All right. So I have what I call a wet rag, so meaning I've used this already on other parts, and I use this first to spread out the stain. And all I want to do is make sure that the stain gets into the grain, because I can't have any what I call blonde spots in it, meaning that there's an area that doesn't get the stain. And once I've got that part done, it's just a matter of wiping off with a dry rag. And with this stain, there comes a point where it can't load anymore. So right here, as you can see, okay, it's getting to that point where I can't take off anymore. And that's the nice part about this, is I can keep wiping like this and blending out, and then once it gets to a certain point, it's just not going to take off anymore. Like, I shouldn't say that. If I really pressed hard, yes, I could. But I can, if let's say there's a blob or something like that on here, I can actually go back over it with the stain and it'll melt it again, in a sense, and re-emulsify it, and then I can go over top of it again. There we go. The last thing you want is fingerprints on this thing too. So once you get to that point, and here, there's a small mark right there. Okay, that's off. And to make sure that I inspect everything before it goes out. So I got the doors ready to go here, and I'm only going to be spraying one side at a time. So the backs are going to be done first, okay? And I've got it down on my pegboard here, and I've only got it just sitting on here because I do not want to move it or I'll scratch the face. Going around the edge so I can put it down here. And this is just either leftover carpet or underpad. This is just a piece of underpad that I have. It works great for this. I like it because it doesn't have fibers. Like if you put it on a blanket or a towel or something like that, I find that they can sometimes pull a fiber into the grain, and well, that can ruin a project pretty quick. Okay, so my goal first is to get that inside panel perfect, and then I go to the top and bottom rail and just go top to bottom on the stiles, the sides here. It's critical to take a look at your edges here at this point because they tend to load, and if they get ignored, well, it looks awful. And then I just do one final inspection. This way I don't have to do both sides of it and try to control the quality that way. But here, look at this. I've got it fairly consistent. So my center panel, you can see, is a little bit darker than my rails here. So that is what I'm going to be shading up when I do these doors, because I want to bring them to roughly what that is right there. All right, so I'm going to be doing the face now, and I got to make sure that when I get into the perimeter of this, that the stain is going this way. So I have to get it on a slight angle to make sure I get into every single corner. At the same time, I don't want to be when I do these edges, I don't want to be going so that I put stain on the other side. So I got to be very careful with that. So watch what I do here. So I made sure that when I was doing this that I didn't get that stained so that it rolled around the edge as much. I'll show you what that looks like when I get this thing all wiped out. Again, wet rag to get the bulk off. Get into all my edges and corners, make sure that they're all good and wet. All right, raggy do. I always do the center panel first, make sure I get that done properly. And then I go to my rails, and then the stiles. And at that point, this thing's already starting to flash and set up, and then I can go to my panel again and just do the final detail on it, like that. And the last is just making sure that I get these edges done proper. Because it's already starting to set on the edges, so you got to put a little bit of effort into it to get it off. Final inspection. There we go. So I'm going to be putting some shader on these doors right now, and I'm going to show you this for a second. Right down there. You can see how it's a little bit light, and then a little bit light there. It happens every once in a while if you don't sand everything 100%, or you wipe a little bit too much on one side, you get a little bit of a difference in color. So I want to be able to blend that out as best as I can. And what I'm going to be using is a shader. And this shader is, if you were to make it yourself, it's basically 1 part stain, 1 part sealer. I use a vinyl sealer, and then 3 parts reducer. Will give you a shader if you have to make it. When I order my stain, I have them mix up some for me, and it's basically a 1-to-4 ratio. So if I buy 1 gallon, I get 1 quart of shader, because you really don't need that much of it. It's just a matter of going around this perimeter a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now that's nicely toned out. It'll look quite a bit different when the sealer goes on that. But this is the way I do it so that I don't have inconsistencies in my finish. A little helpful tip, if you're using a gun and you want to use it, let's say for shader, and you want to be able to regulate how much material comes out, I stick my thumb like right there on the trigger. And that way I can kind of hold back the trigger as far as I want. I can move my thumb front or back just as much as I need to get just the material out that I want. That way I don't need to adjust any of these things. I can always just leave them for doing staining. And then when I need to do a little bit of shading, I just use my thumb to regulate it out. It just makes it a little bit easier for me. All right, I'm going to show you how I put on the sealer. Next part of the job is doing the scuff sanding after I have put the sealer on here. So when I put the sealer on, I double coat, meaning I go one way, going this way as you saw when I was doing it, and then I go back the other way. And I try to establish that full wet coat. And the reason I want to do that is because at this stage here, I'm going to be sanding with this sanding machine here, and it's a 3x2 sanding pad that's on here. And if you don't get enough finish on here, you'll end up cutting through like past the stain layer, and then you end up getting a blonde line somewhere on it, and that's what you do not want. So when I'm doing this, I want to be able to just get enough so that the next finish will get a bite onto this. So this is actually called a mechanical bond here. There's a chemical bond, which means you can go what's called wet on wet, but now I'm doing this one, which is called a mechanical, and I need something to actually grab to it. And that's why you scuff sand and make sure that you can get an actual tooth on it. So here, I'll show you what I use. So that, I've got most of the perimeter done on this panel here. So now I just got to do the spots that the pad doesn't do. It doesn't do all the way into the corner here. So all I do is I just take the paper, or I use leftover sandpaper from the actual unit there, and I get into it, and I just rub it slightly and pull. Go like this, and then pull down. Okay? I don't want to go too much against the grain, but it is 320 and it gets lost in the finish once you spray. There. And then pull down. Same thing here. So, and just get the inside profile. Lightly around the edges here. Now when I do this, because I sprayed the back side first and then the front side, that means these edges get double coated, which is important because that is the area that tends to get chipped and damaged, probably most, certainly within a kitchen application. So that's why I kind of like doing one side at a time, because then I double coat these edges and it just ends up with a better product at the end of the day. So now I just blow this off. And then I can check to see if there's any anomalies. And you can see right here and there were some like bumps that could have been in the wood itself. It could have been a fiber. Could have been multiple things. But then I can make the call. How does it feel? And I can just give it a little bit more, just to clean it up. But then I feel the panel after it's done, and my hand is going to tell me everything if the finish is good or not. And that feels fine there. And then all I do is just go over it with a cloth, and the cloth just gets rid of the last little bit of dust that's on the panel. You can use a tack cloth too, but I find a good towel like this works fine, and I just shake it out every once in a while, and it takes off most of the debris that's there. So take a look. Okay, so nice and smooth, and now that is ready for the next top coat. So little helpful tip here. You can see that I'm on a bench here. This is actually, I've raised the platform on my spray table here. I've just put some cans underneath it with a piece of plywood and a piece of underpad. Just enough so that it raises it up off of the surface so that I'm about 6 inches above my hands, or below my hands. But it just gives it so much better for me so that I don't end up hurting my back, because trust me, after years of doing this, the more I can make my life that much more convenient, the better it is. It just helps my back at the end of the day. All right, so I've got 1 liter of clear finish. So this is my top coat that's going on here. It's a 20 sheen. And I put in 1 liter. And if you can look on the graduation down here, it's set at 1 liter. Now, I like to do this by weight, and it's showing me as 17 milliliters. So I want to add catalyst to this, and I want my catalyst ratio for this, or hardener, is 50%. So half of that is 508. So that's how much I actually have to add into this. And the reason I like doing it by weight is I can get it absolutely perfect every single time. So if I put in, let's say, a liter and a little bit, I can actually tell what it is and then try to figure out the ratio from that point. So there, so I need 15, okay, 12, 13, 14, and getting up there. I'm at 15. Oh, there we go. So I've got my ratio now set for that, and I need to add in 20% reducer. Pour that in. That's a heavy jug. So I just want to go a little bit less than that. So I'm going to go actually 175. The advantage of doing it this way is if you're doing small batch, let's say you want to do 100 mil, it's so much easier by doing it by weight as opposed to doing it by volume, because it's so hard when you're doing small little amounts. Like if I just want to spray one door, you know, you have to put it into a cup. I can actually mix this paint inside my cup gun and get the ratios done right there, as opposed to using one of these mixing vessels every time. So this is just a very easy way of doing it, and you get a much higher quality of finish when you can get your proportions perfect. Okay, so next part, I've got a coat on the back side of the door, and it's only going to get one coat on the back and then two on the face. I'm going to be putting a coat on here, and then I'm going to wait about roughly about an hour, and then I'm going to be putting a second coat over top of it. But I'm not going to be sanding in between each coat. I only sand in between the sealer coat and the top coat, and that's it. Reason being is when I'm putting on the second coat, I'm doing what's called a chemical bond as opposed to a mechanical bond when you sand. So when it's still slightly wet, meaning it's dry to the touch, but it's not completely chemically bonded, you don't got that cross link yet, I can put a second coat over top of it and it grips onto the next one below it. So that way I can put two coats on basically in one day, and I get more of that full finish. If you're in a factory setting like home centers and that kind of thing, they only get one coat on here and that's it. And that's what you end up paying for. But in this being custom, I'm going to be doing a full finish on here, and you'll be able to see the difference. So there you go. You should see a reflection of the lights. Okay, and that tells you that you've got a nice full finish. I don't know why I have to go to the washroom for some reason. Can never figure that out. Why is that? Alright, it's all done. There we go. Still got nice grain poking through. And a beautiful fill.